Hello and welcome to the Authority of Love. I'm Greg Williams, and again, we're here Family Foundation Friday with Executive Director of the Family Foundation, David Walls. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Greg, good to be with you.
Thanks, brother. I love it. The last 2 or 3 weeks, David, we have been discussing some pretty hot topics and controversial issues, and I hope that our listeners are hearing not only what needs to be heard, but our hearts in this. And if you missed any of those, you can go back and listen. We have them at theloveandlordship.com. You can click on our Vimeo page and get the video, or on the Podbean page and get the podcast, as well as kentuckyfamily.org and find these. And we'll have more on those in a little while. But there's several things going on that we know we're dealing with here in Kentucky. But there are also issues nationwide, and we want to touch on those, including what's going on still in Jefferson County Public Schools. So we're going to start with that, David. Tell us what has happened. There's been a fiasco there beyond SB 150 and the transgender issue, right?
Yeah, Greg. We talked last week about the continued concern at Jefferson County and here in Lexington and Fayette County schools about their refusal to follow some of the important protections requirements as it relates to curriculum and bathroom privacy and safety and so forth last week. But subsequent to the conversation that you and I had, school started back, and folks have probably seen this. It's actually gotten national news. There was a kind of a systematic failure of the busing system that apparently had been reworked under under the new superintendent of the schools, and there was, it's been reported that it was almost a complete breakdown. Some kids were not getting home till very late in the evening. Obviously, tremendous concern from parents not knowing where their kids are, and the school system, JCPS, has shut down. And as we sit here right now recording before Friday, Greg, they still have not. Kids have not gone back to school.
Projected to start this Friday for elementary and middle school, I think, right?
Yeah, that's the last that I've heard.
Right.
And so just continues to be extremely concerning. The leadership issues that are going on at all levels in the Jefferson County public school system, and as we shared in our email updates and encourage folks to get our regular updates at kentuckyfamily.org. You have a school board who was meeting right up to the start of the school year to try to figure out ways to subvert or not follow the law. While in the meantime, it sounds like to me that things needed to be done to make sure.
When it came to transgender issues.
Yes.
Along with that, right. But they still didn't get figured out. And we don't want to throw them under the bus.
Right.
No pun intended there.
Look, this is about kids.
Right.
I mean,
that's
the kids
point.
need to be in school. These are real, concerning things. And as one of the other things that got reported is there was, I believe, every House and Senate member that touches Jefferson County, or at least the Republicans, if not all of the members that touch it, have signed on to a letter actually calling for the governor to call a special session so that they can address some of these continued concerns about the school systems there. And one of the things they called for that I think, Greg, you and I have probably talked a little bit, that we anticipate will be a big issue in the upcoming legislative session next year, is the issue of educational freedom and school choice. And ultimately, we're continuing to see the need, both here in Kentucky and across the nation, to switch up the model and say we're going to empower parents to be able to choose the school that's best for their kids, and to look at ways in terms of how we fund schools to make it make sense.
And I would add to that, David, here's the thing. By the outcomes, by the consequences of what we see happening, you alluded to it, they spent time and dollars right up to the start of school implementing the law, but doing it in a way that literally was apart from the law. And in so doing, they didn't prioritize, at least it doesn't look like they prioritized the safety of these kids, with some of them not getting home until 10 o'clock at night. Now, we don't know all the reasons for that, but the point is school choice and finding the school that best fits you puts it back in the hands of parents, which is what we've been talking a lot about, and is best for the children. And so if public schools are doing a good job, there's no threat.
Right.
There's no threat at all. But if they're not and they're misguided priorities, then there should be options.
Right.
And that's all we're saying here with that. There's another thing going on with the law that you shared with me. I was not aware of this, but in Vermont and Illinois, some laws, just briefly touch on that. They're trying to silence maybe or shut down pregnancy care centers. What's going on with that?
You know, Greg, as the pro-life battles across the nation continue to enter into different phases, we're seeing some of the what can only be described as vehemently pro-abortion states take further action, and one of those, unfortunately, has been in some states looking to try to silence or discourage women from getting the help the true help that they can actually get in a pro-life pregnancy care center. You know, Greg, you and I have talked. We're blessed to have 50 or so centers here in Kentucky. We need more of them. We need more across the nation. But thankfully, there are a lot of, and this is pretty well established. There's been some cases that have even gone up to the Supreme Court. You know, anytime the government steps in and tries to coerce speech or to limit the speech of an organization, there's a lot of deep concerns. But what's even truly troubling about this, though, is we're talking about organizations that are designed most of the time completely free of charge to provide women with help and resources, counseling, sonograms, I mean, just a host of services.
And the men, and of course the children, the babies. Yes.
So we should be, you know, looking at ways to encourage new centers to open and to help promote these centers instead of what we're unfortunately seeing in some other states is systematically targeting them. And why are they targeting them? Because they're being effective.
Yes.
If they weren't being effective,
they
wouldn't be a threat to the pro-abortion movement.
No, and I say this too, David. Why do we talk about that? We've several times talked about national issues because even though we are a fairly conservative state and hopefully are getting more conservative, that doesn't keep them from trying to do the same thing here. And we want to be careful and guarded against that. The other thing I say about that is, I used to say this when I did the abstinence until marriage program, the sexual risk avoidance program, was when I would talk to pregnancy care centers, I would say to them, our job is to put you out of business. Not in a bad way, but in a good way, because the issue is not the baby and the abortion. Those are symptoms of a deeper issue of sexual immorality and sexual sin. And speaking of that, we've got another issue that's nationwide and right here in Kentucky. And that's sports gambling. Fill our listeners in on some of the things that have happened just in the past few days or weeks with regard to that, David.
Yeah, you know, there has now been over 30 states, Greg, that just since 2018 have legalized sports betting.
Right.
Unfortunately, including Kentucky this past legislative session, and
snuck it in at the end, right?
And in the process of implementing that, and so. What have we seen since that's happened? And there continues to be a lot of reporting going on in this, and not necessarily from sources that are anti-gambling by any stretch of the imagination, but the social cost and the amount of dollars that are being wasted and drained from Americans' bank accounts and ultimately from families is just continuing to be overwhelming. I saw a recent report in the Financial Times that at a minimum there has been $245 billion that has been pulled into this, and we're seeing it now play out in the sports leagues, in college sports. Greg, we shared,
sports.
We just recently shared in our, folks may have heard about this, but the two major universities in Iowa both have current and former student athletes that have been
numbers of them
caught up in a gambling investigation. I believe have had criminal charges filed. We've seen, an Alabama baseball coach has lost his job over gambling. We're seeing an explosion of these issues breaking out, particularly in colleges and among college athletes. And that's one of the things, Greg, that we pointed out in this past legislative session is think of the financial incentives for student athletes and the temptation to bet on their own games and so forth. When you're talking about billions of dollars, being at stake in this industry,
it's a tremendous lure.
It is, and so, but deeper than that. It's as Greg, anytime you see this kind of proliferation of gambling, and in the case of sports betting, you're talking about an addiction on top of an addiction.
Yes.
You're talking about gambling being addiction, taking place on mobile devices, which are already
an addiction.
Addiction. So it's just interesting to see how we're seeing more and more reports of folks being made aware of and reminding folks of the harms and consequences of going down a path of the government partnering with an industry that's designed to essentially fleece its own citizens.
People. That's exactly right. I'll just say this as we could talk more on this, and we probably will. But if you don't know these, look up from Pete Rose to Calvin Ridley, okay? Iowa and Iowa State. Allegedly, Phil Mickelson was wanting to bet nearly $500,000 on his own Ryder Cup competition is the sport. And the bookie, this is alleged, bookie talked him out of it. How's that? The bookie has more character than the professional athlete. If it's true, I don't know for sure, but there's evidence of this.
Well, the temptation is just all around. Greg.
Yes.
One of the other kind of breaking news stories on this front is Disney. Via ESPN, which is owned by Disney, they've already been obviously involved in the advertising side of it. If you've watched sports or visited ESPN.com.
And the LGBTQ side, which is damaging to kids.
But now they're partnering directly with the gambling company to open a sports book. Apparently it's a multi-billion-dollar arrangement. We're going to see, continue to see, the intermingling of sports and gambling, and I fear for are concerned, I should say, about the impacts this is going to have on the next generation, who's going to grow up being told that gambling and sports go hand in hand.
And it's all okay.
Yeah, and it's all okay.
Here's what I've said before, and I'll close with this before we plug the forum again. But the 2018, you referenced that because there was a Supreme Court decision that kind of opened the floodgates. And my comment was, when you open the floodgates, there's going to be a flood.
Right.
And now we're seeing that, the $245 billion, and that's underreported.
Yeah.
That's underreported. But here's the thing. Who's getting rich and who's suffering, people? Ask yourself that question, and the evidence is out there now. We've been told we can gamble our way out of debt, we can gamble our way to a better education, we can gamble our way out of gambling addiction. There's not enough money, as with any vice, to pay for the personal and social ills and the breakdowns that ensue. We've got to remember that, and our votes count. Check and see which people are standing up and supporting this and which are against it.
Right.
If you're for it, vote for the ones who are for it. But if you're not, don't listen to them. Go look at their record and see what they're saying. So with that said, David, plug the forum again for October 7th, because we're getting some momentum on that, right?
A lot of momentum, and folks buying tickets and tables, and we're still doing early bird discounting on the individual tickets. But if folks go to KentuckyFamily.org on Saturday, October 7th, here in Lexington, we're going to have our first and Lord willing, annual Kentucky Family Forum. It's going to be a day-long Christian worldview and public policy event, a gathering of Christians and social conservatives with speakers, some national speakers, some state speakers, just to talk more in depth about how we can think through and engage to be salt and light on these important issues of our day. Hope folks will join us.
Filling up. It's filling up, right?
It is.
Already.
It is.
So, and we're a couple months out. So thank you for that, and keep spreading the word and join us. Thank you for joining us. As always, thanks for your prayers, and thanks to the Lord. Stay tuned right after this for Bill Reeser and Encounter. And then at 12:45, my good friend Greg Horn and Hope is here. Thank you for joining us. I'm Greg Williams, and you're listening to The Authority of Love.